What the?
Hey guys, Comic Boom here to review on behalf of Professor Bill at Comic Book University, Deathbed. It's a Vertigo series written by Joshua Williamson. So if you guys love The Flash, he writes The Flash and he's a great writer, and he's got an independent series that he's written for Vertigo called Deathbed. Now what's Deathbed about? Well, here we go in 5 minutes or less. Fingers crossed. This is about a man who wants to have his life story written. He's a guy that's lived a James Bond kind of life, and yet no one's ever really heard of him, or no one seems to really remember him. He basically recruits a woman by the name of Valentine to write his autobiography, and she doesn't know who he is, and he's very arrogant. He figures, if you don't know who I am, it's more of a reflection on you than it is on me. I'm a great guy. I have a rich legacy. When I was born, my dad said that you're gonna have a fantastic life. You're gonna be the greatest man who's ever lived, or you're gonna die trying. And that's really what Antonio Luna, the lead character in this series, Deathbed, is gonna do. He wants to die. He basically wants to have an exciting life. He wants to go out. He wants to go out at the top of the game, and he wants to have somebody, this Valentine reporter, write his autobiography. Now, Deathbed refers to the fact, at least in the opening issue, it refers to the fact that he pretends to be dying. He pretends to be dying because what he wants to do is he wants to get a reporter in to ostensibly give his life story, but also he wants to lure his enemies in because there's unknown forces at work that want to destroy the legacy of Antonio Luna. And by destroying his legacy, they're literally going through all the people that Mr. Luna has ever met in his entire life and is slowly killing them off. And these unknown forces are even killing and wiping out Luna's enemies. And that really pisses him off. Why? Because enemies are important too. Because how can you have a legacy if you don't have people that you didn't like? How can you have a legacy if you didn't have enemies? You can't be liked. You know, he prides himself on always doing the right thing because that's his life. He has a James Bond existence. But here's the tragedy, and here's the genius of Joshua Williamson's writing. Because as much as this guy wants to have a legacy, the sad part is it's kind of pathetic. His life is kind of pathetic. He brags about how whenever he got too bored in his life, whenever he got too comfortable, Luna would always move on to the next adventure. And while that might sound fun, the reality is that here he is near the end of his life, an old man, albeit in great shape, but he's got nothing to show for it. He has past loves, but he's got no current wife. He's got no children. He really has no legacy. All he has is his past, and he wants to preserve it. But the problem is some unknown forces are wiping out his past, or wiping out the people he knew, and even his enemies. And that destroys him inside because he'll have nothing left if his entire legacy is wiped out and there's nothing left. Now, what's interesting about this is really funny. Joshua Williamson nails the dialogue here. The arrogance and the bravado of of Antonio Luna. It's over the top, but it's very comical the way it's played out. And his interactions and his rapport with the reporter Valentine that he's dragging around as he goes around the world to try to prevent his friends and enemies from being killed. And by the way, his friends barely remember him, and some of his enemies barely remember him because he's in and out of everyone's lives so quickly. This James Bond, who's been everywhere, really doesn't seem to have created a lasting impression on anybody. And it's tragic, but at the same time, it's really funny. It's sort of like playing it's like taking a different take on the James Bond idea, or the superhero idea. Everybody assumes that if you're a great superhero, that people are going to love you and always remember you, and that love you had 20, 30 years ago, that the woman that you used to love is always going to remember you. Well, in his case, they don't. They completely forget about him. And this is sort of like, it's taken a different interpretation on the so-called great heroes, because the message here in the first 3 issues anyway is, look, you might think you're a great hero, but, really, unless you actually settle down and have a life and have children and maintain friendships, what's the meaning of life? What's the point? The real legacy is friendship. The real legacy is family. The real legacy is having a love. But Antonio Luna, he might be kind of like a powerful mortal, a James Bond type, but the fact is, he's kind of a lonely, bitter man who's desperately searching for a legacy and desperately wanting a reporter named Valentine to try to find some meaning in his life. And I'm not really sure where this is going, but I do know that at the end of issue 3 here, he's starting to question himself, and he's searching for a new kind of meaning in his life. And His search continues. For what? I'm not really sure, but this is a really good series, guys. It makes you think. It's one of those things that makes you question, what's the meaning of life? And more importantly, if you're James Bond, if you're a James Bond type of guy, what's the meaning of life if you're in your 60s or early 70s in great shape, but you got nothing to show for it, no friends, and all your enemies and friends are being killed off that you did have anyway? Guys, check this out. Deathbed. It's a great series. I'm reviewing issues 1 to 3. Issue 3 just came out in the week of April 17th. I would give this series so far a solid B+. It's a solid B+. It's well worth it. If you're fans of Joshua Williamson, he writes The Flash. He also wrote a vertical series called Frostbite. Check it out. It's well worth your time. By the way, you can check me out on my own YouTube channel, Comic Boom, under Comic Boom, and I do have a Twitter account, Metropolis40. So guys, Comic Boom out. Class dismissed.